Part 1. A heart that saw the invisible. The compassion of Jesus was unlike anything his followers had ever witnessed. It was not loud, dramatic, or attention-seeking. It was quiet, steady, and deeply personal. Wherever he walked, along dusty village paths, beside fishing boats in Galilee, or through crowded marketplaces, he carried with him a heart that noticed those whom the world overlooked. His compassion was not limited to moments of healing. It shaped every word he spoke, every step he took, and every person he embraced. People followed Jesus for many reasons: curiosity, hope, desperation, longing. Some followed him because they had nowhere else to go. Others followed because they sensed that his presence offered something the world could never give. And in every face, in every voice, Jesus saw not just a person, but a story of struggle, of longing, of fear, of hope, waiting to be awakened. His compassion was rooted in his ability to see people as they truly were, not as society labeled them. His compassion reached fishermen weary from long nights, mothers burdened with worry, and men weighed down by decisions they regretted. It reached the lonely, the forgotten, and those trapped in cycles of shame. When Jesus looked upon someone, his gaze held no judgment. Instead, it carried a deep understanding, an awareness of the pain they carried, and an unwavering desire to bring restoration. From the very beginning of his ministry, Jesus showed that compassion was not merely a feeling, it was an action. It moved him toward the broken, the fearful, and the rejected. It guided his steps, shaped his teachings, and revealed the heart of God in a world that desperately needed hope. Through his compassion, people experienced not only physical healing, but emotional renewal, forgiveness, and a sense of belonging they had never known. This is where our journey begins. As we reflect on the compassion of Jesus, we discover a love that is gentle yet powerful, tender yet transformative, and endlessly patient with the human heart. Part 2. The compassion that drew near to suffering. One of the most striking qualities of Jesus' compassion was his willingness to draw near to suffering rather than avoid it. In a time when illness and hardship often caused people to distance themselves from the afflicted, Jesus did the opposite. He stepped forward. When he saw the man with leprosy approach him, trembling and uncertain, Jesus did not recoil as others did. Instead, he stretched out his hand and touched him. That touch alone was a miracle, not only because it healed the leper, but because it restored dignity to a man who had lived in isolation for years. Jesus showed that compassion is not afraid of the messiness of human life. It walks directly into it. He approached the grieving, such as the widow at Nain, whose only son had died. The crowd saw only tragedy. Jesus saw a broken heart in desperate need of comfort. With gentle authority, he spoke life back into her child. His compassion was not abstract, it was deeply personal, shaped by genuine care for the burdens people carried. He visited homes filled with sorrow, stood beside beds of sickness, and walked into moments that made others uncomfortable. The compassion of Jesus was willing to meet people at their lowest point. He showed them that they were not forgotten, not abandoned, and not beyond the reach of God's love. This truth comforted countless early believers, and it continues to comfort us today. Jesus does not stand far away from suffering. He draws near to it with understanding, patience, and the desire to bring healing in ways we often cannot see. Part 3. A compassion that listened. So much of Jesus' compassion was revealed not only through his actions, but through his listening. He listened to the words people spoke, but he also listened to the words they could not bring themselves to say. He listened to their fears, their unspoken doubts, their silent hopes. His compassion made space for people to be honest without fear of harsh judgment. When the woman caught in adultery stood trembling before him, surrounded by accusations, Jesus did not raise his voice or condemn her. Instead, he listened to her silence, to her shame, to her longing for mercy. His compassion created a space where grace could take root. "Neither do I condemn you," he said, offering hope in a moment filled with fear. He listened to the anxious father pleading for his son, whose voice cracked under the weight of desperation. He listened to Martha's grief, to Mary's tears, to the cries of the blind and the whispers of the weary. His listening told people that their struggles mattered and that their voices were heard by God. Today, his compassion still speaks through those moments of quiet understanding, when we feel seen, known, and comforted, even in our silence. Part 4. Compassion that reached across barriers. Jesus' compassion did not stop at the boundaries society created. In a world divided by class, reputation, nationality, and religious expectations, he consistently stepped across invisible lines that kept people separated. His compassion moved freely, unrestricted by labels, unbothered by social rules, and unmoved by the opinions of those who believed certain people were unworthy of God's love. One powerful example is found in his meeting with the Samaritan woman at the well. Jews and Samaritans avoided one another, carrying generations of tension between them. Yet Jesus chose to rest at that well, knowing she would come. When she arrived, burdened by past choices, carrying emotional weight she rarely spoke aloud, Jesus spoke to her with dignity and patience. He saw beyond her reputation into the deep thirst of her soul. His compassion offered her living water, hope that restored her identity and changed the story she had been living. Another moment came when Jesus healed the daughter of a Roman centurion. Romans were seen as oppressors, foreign rulers who did not belong among God's people. Yet Jesus listened to the centurion's request, honoring his humility and faith. His compassion transcended cultural hostility, revealing that God's love extends far beyond the boundaries people create. He touched lepers. He spoke with tax collectors. He honored women in a culture that often overlooked them. He welcomed children when others tried to send them away. He embraced those who lived on the outskirts of society. His compassion was a bridge, reaching across barriers and drawing people into the gentle presence of God. For early believers, this was revolutionary. They realized that the love of God was not limited to one group, one nation, or one kind of person. It was wide enough to include everyone. And for us today, his example continues to challenge the heart. It invites us to look beyond differences, beyond labels, beyond first impressions, and to see the human soul beneath. His compassion calls each of us to build bridges where walls once stood. Part 5. Compassion expressed through gentle strength. Many people imagine compassion as something soft, something quiet and delicate. But the compassion of Jesus carried both gentleness and strength. It was gentle in the way he spoke, listened, and embraced those in pain. Yet it was strong enough to confront injustice, push back against oppression, and defend the vulnerable when others remained silent. One day, as Jesus taught in the synagogue, a woman entered, bent over, unable to stand upright for 18 long years. Her condition was not only painful, but deeply isolating. While others saw her as an interruption or an inconvenience, Jesus saw her suffering. His compassion moved him to heal her immediately. When religious leaders criticized him for restoring her on the Sabbath, Jesus spoke with firm authority, defending her dignity. His strength protected her, showing that compassion is not weakness, but a powerful force that lifts the oppressed. We see this same strong compassion when Jesus overturned the tables of the money changers in the temple. His anger was not rooted in cruelty or pride. It was rooted in compassion for those being taken advantage of. He could not stand by while injustice flourished in a place meant for prayer. His compassion empowered him to act boldly when silence would have caused harm. He showed gentle strength when he protected the woman caught in adultery, silencing her accusers with wisdom and grace. He showed strength when he called out hypocrisy, not to shame others, but to free them from patterns that harmed themselves and the people around them. His compassion had a backbone. It defended, restored, and set people free. Early believers learned that true compassion requires both tenderness and courage. It reaches out to the broken, but it also stands firm against anything that diminishes the value of a human soul. It is steady enough to lift others and strong enough to challenge what is harmful. Today, his example invites us to live with compassion that is soft enough to heal and strong enough to protect. A compassion that listens deeply but also speaks truth when needed. A compassion that brings peace but also brings justice.
Part 6.
Compassion that entered into grief. One of the most comforting aspects of Jesus' compassion was his willingness to enter into grief. He did not rush past sorrow or offer shallow reassurances. He joined people in their pain, honoring their tears with his presence. When his friend Lazarus died, Jesus met Martha and Mary in the deepest moment of their loss. Martha approached him with honesty. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." A statement filled with heartbreak. Mary fell at his feet weeping, unable to speak through her tears. Jesus did not rebuke them for questioning or grieving. Instead, he wept with them. This moment reveals the heart of God more clearly than words can express. The creator of the universe stood beside two grieving sisters and allowed his tears to mingle with theirs. Before performing the miracle of raising Lazarus, he first shared in their sorrow. His compassion was not only about solving suffering, it was about entering into it with love. For early believers, this truth brought deep comfort. They understood that Jesus does not ignore grief or expect his followers to hide their sorrow. He meets them in it, fully, tenderly, and without haste. His compassion honors every tear and accompanies every broken heart. Today, many find hope in this same truth. Jesus is not distant from human suffering. Whether grief arrives through loss, disappointment, or brokenness, his compassion draws near. He understands pain not as an observer, but as one who has walked through it himself. Part 7. Compassion that restored the broken-hearted. Jesus had a unique ability to see the burdens people carried deep within their hearts. The disappointments, the regrets, the quiet wounds others never noticed. His compassion reached into these hidden places, offering restoration to those who felt broken inside. One of the most striking examples is his encounter with Peter after the resurrection. Peter, who had once boldly proclaimed his loyalty, had denied Jesus 3 times. The weight of his failure pressed heavily upon him. Though he tried to move forward, Returning to the familiar life of fishing, his heart remained unsettled and full of shame. When Jesus appeared to the disciples on the shore of Galilee, he could have spoken words of correction, but his compassion moved him to restore Peter gently. He prepared a meal for him, a simple breakfast by the sea, and asked him 3 times, "Do you love me?" Each question was an invitation for healing, allowing Peter to reaffirm his devotion and release the guilt he carried. Jesus' compassion did not dwell on Peter's failure, but opened a path for renewed purpose. This moment teaches us something profound. Jesus never leaves a broken heart in pieces. He gathers the fragments with kindness, reshapes them with hope, and restores them with grace. People who felt unworthy found acceptance in his presence. Those who lived with regret discovered forgiveness. Those burdened by shame received a new beginning. His compassion transformed hearts that seemed beyond repair. Early believers learned that following Jesus meant allowing his compassion to reach into their own brokenness. They realized that restoration was not something earned, it was something gifted. It came through honesty, humility, and the willingness to let his love enter even the most painful corners of the soul. Today, his compassion still restores broken hearts. Where there is regret, he brings forgiveness. Where there is shame, he brings dignity. Where there is heaviness, he brings peace. Part 8. Compassion for the weary and overwhelmed. Many people who came to Jesus were not sick or grieving, they were simply weary, exhausted by life, weighed down by responsibilities, and overwhelmed by pressures they carried alone. Jesus saw this weariness, and his compassion responded with some of the most comforting words ever spoken. "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." These words revealed a deep truth about his heart. Jesus understood that physical healing alone would not restore the human spirit. People needed rest, not just for their bodies, but for their minds and souls. His compassion was not limited to dramatic miracles. It extended to quiet encouragement, gentle reassurance, and the invitation to find peace in his presence. He welcomed the weary with patience. He spoke to the discouraged with tenderness. He guided the overwhelmed with clarity and calm. When crowds followed him for days, hungry and tired, he fed them, not only to fill their stomachs, but to show that he cared for every aspect of their lives. When he saw his disciples strained by fear during a storm, he calmed the winds and reassured their hearts. When people felt overwhelmed by the expectations of religious leaders, he lifted the weight with words of grace. Early believers treasured these moments. They understood that Jesus' compassion brought rest to the restless and stillness to the anxious. It reminded them that faith was not a burden, but a place of refuge. And today, his invitation remains the same. To every weary soul, to every overwhelmed heart, to everyone carrying more than they can bear, his compassion whispers gently, "Come to me. Find your rest. You are not alone." Part 9. Compassion toward those who felt unworthy. Many who approached Jesus did so with hesitation. They felt unworthy of his attention, shaped by years of being judged, rejected, or dismissed by society. Yet Jesus had a remarkable way of lifting the heads of the downcast, restoring their dignity with a single word, a simple gesture, or a moment of sincere acceptance. One such encounter was with the tax collector Zacchaeus. He was a man avoided by many, viewed as a traitor, labeled as dishonest, and pushed to the edges of community life. When Jesus entered Jericho, Zacchaeus hid in a tree just to catch a glimpse of him, believing he was unworthy of anything more. But Jesus saw him immediately. He called Zacchaeus by name and chose to stay in his home, despite public criticism. That simple act of compassion changed Zacchaeus completely. It softened his heart, renewed his purpose, and awakened generosity he had long abandoned. Jesus' compassion did not focus on who Zacchaeus had been. It focused on who he could become through grace. The same is true of the sinful woman who wept at Jesus' feet. Society saw her as unworthy, but Jesus saw her tears as a beautiful offering of love and repentance. His compassion lifted the burden of her past and welcomed her into a new story shaped by mercy. Early believers found immense comfort in this truth. Jesus welcomes those who feel unworthy, overlooked, or burdened by shame. His compassion is not reserved for the flawless. It is extended to those who long for a new beginning. In his presence, no one is beyond redemption, and no heart is too broken to be restored. Today, this same compassion invites each of us to come as we are, bringing our flaws, our wounds, and our regrets, confident that Jesus receives us with love, not condemnation. Part 10. Compassion that brought light into darkness. Jesus' compassion was also a light that entered places of spiritual and emotional darkness. Many people he encountered carried burdens that others could not see, fears that clouded their minds, doubts that stole their peace, and a heaviness that lingered beneath the surface of everyday life. He encountered a man tormented by spiritual oppression, living in isolation among the tombs. The world saw him as uncontrollable, dangerous, and beyond hope. But Jesus saw the person behind the torment. With authority and compassion, he restored the man's mind and set him free. The man who once wandered alone now sat at Jesus' feet, clothed, calm, and filled with purpose. His restoration became a beacon of hope for the entire region. Jesus also brought light into the darkness of guilt and fear. When his disciples hid after his arrest, confused, anxious, and ashamed, Jesus sought them out after his resurrection. He offered peace instead of rebuke, reassurance instead of anger. He breathed new courage into hearts that had been overwhelmed by fear. His compassion shone brightest in moments where people felt trapped, whether by their past, their circumstances, or their own thoughts. He brought clarity where there was confusion, hope where there was despair, and direction where there was uncertainty. This is the nature of divine compassion. It does not simply comfort, it transforms. It does not merely soothe, it restores. It does not only illuminate, it guides. Early believers learned that Jesus' compassion was a steady light in every kind of darkness. And for modern listeners, that light continues to shine. His compassion reaches into every hidden worry, every quiet fear, and every place where joy has faded. Where darkness settles, his presence brings dawn. Part 11. Compassion toward the outsider and the rejected. Throughout Jesus' ministry, some of the most powerful displays of compassion occurred when he encountered those society had pushed away: the outsider, the unwanted, the forgotten. In a culture shaped by strict boundaries of purity, status, and reputation, Jesus consistently moved toward those who lived on the margins. One such example was his encounter with the 10 lepers. They lived outside the cities, excluded from family, community, and worship because of their condition. When they cried out, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us," he did not hesitate. He healed them from afar, restoring not only their bodies, but their place in society and in their homes. Though only one returned to give thanks, Jesus' compassion was not diminished. His heart remained generous even in the absence of appreciation. Another moment came when he welcomed children into his presence. In that culture, children were not considered people of importance, yet Jesus embraced them, blessing them with the tenderness and attention usually reserved for adults. His compassion declared that every person, no matter how small or disregarded, held immeasurable worth in God's eyes. He also showed compassion to those burdened by spiritual rejection. Tax collectors, sinners, and those labeled as failures found acceptance in his presence. He ate with them, spoke with them, and treated them as children of God rather than problems to be avoided. Early believers were deeply shaped by this aspect of Jesus' compassion. It taught them that the heart of God is broad enough to welcome every person, regardless of how society defines their value. It reminded them, and us, that no one is beyond the reach of divine love.
Part 12.
Compassion that healed the hidden wounds. Not all suffering is visible. Some of the deepest wounds people carry are hidden beneath the surface, quiet struggles that go unnoticed by others. Jesus' compassion reached these unseen places with remarkable understanding. One example is the woman who had suffered from a bleeding condition for 12 years. She had spent everything she had on treatments, yet nothing helped. Her physical pain was heavy, but her emotional pain was heavier. She lived with isolation, shame, and the belief that she was unclean, unworthy of human touch. When she reached through the crowd to touch the edge of Jesus' garment, she hoped only to be healed physically. But Jesus offered so much more. He turned toward her, called her daughter, and restored her identity. His compassion did not stop at her body. It touched the deepest wound of her heart. Another quiet moment of compassion came when Jesus looked upon the rich young ruler. The man struggled not with sickness, but with attachment, fear, and a restless desire for meaning. Before Jesus spoke a single word, Scripture says, Jesus looked at him and loved him. This simple phrase reveals a truth about his compassion. It begins with love, even before action or instruction. Jesus saw the man's longing, his sincerity, and his inner conflict, and he responded with both honesty and tenderness. Jesus also understood the hidden exhaustion of his disciples. When they returned from ministry, tired and overwhelmed, he invited them to rest. When their fears clouded their faith, he guided them with patience. When their understanding faltered, he continued to teach with gentleness. Early believers were comforted by this truth. Jesus understands the wounds no one else sees. He knows the quiet battles, the silent fears, and the pain carried behind a calm face. His compassion does not miss a single tear, even the ones that never fall. Part 13. Compassion that restored hope to the hopeless. There were many people in Jesus' time who had quietly resigned themselves to despair. Life had worn them down, leaving them with little expectation of change. Yet again and again, Jesus' compassion breathed new hope into hearts that had forgotten how to hope. One such moment occurred at the pool of Bethesda. A man who had been disabled for 38 years lay among the sick and forgotten. His body was weak, but his spirit had grown weary as well. When Jesus approached him, He asked a simple question. "Do you want to be made well?" It was a question that reached deeper than the man's physical condition. It touched the wounded places of his hope, the places that had given up long ago. With compassion, Jesus restored his strength and lifted him into a new chapter of life. Hope returned where despair had settled. Jesus showed that no situation is too far gone for the compassion of God to revive. We see this again in the synagogue ruler Jairus. His daughter was dying, and every moment mattered. When word came that she had passed away, despair threatened to swallow him whole. Yet Jesus spoke the words every grieving parent longs to hear. "Do not be afraid, only believe." His compassion stepped into the darkest moment a family can face and brought life where death had tried to claim victory. Early believers reflected on these stories to remind themselves that the compassion of Jesus is not limited by circumstances, time, or impossibility. He meets people where hope is fading, and he rekindles what life has tried to extinguish. And today, his compassion continues to whisper to every discouraged heart. It is not too late. You are not forgotten. Hope can rise again.
Part 14.
Compassion shown through patience. One of the most overlooked expressions of Jesus' compassion was his patience. He understood the slowness of the human heart, how long it takes to grow, to learn, to trust, to heal. And he never rushed people through their struggles or scolded them for moving too slowly. We see his patience clearly in his relationship with the disciples. They misunderstood his teachings, argued about greatness, doubted his power, and struggled with fear. Yet Jesus did not dismiss them. He walked with them. He taught them gently. He explained truths again and again, shaping them over time into courageous leaders. When Peter sank beneath the waves, despite witnessing countless miracles, Jesus reached out immediately, not with anger, but with gentle correction and a steady hand. His compassion understood human weakness and met it with encouragement rather than frustration. His patience is also seen in his parables. He used simple stories because he knew people needed time to understand deeper truths. He planted seeds of wisdom that would blossom slowly over days, months, and years. Early believers treasured this aspect of his compassion. They realized that Jesus does not expect perfection. He expects honesty, willingness, and the courage to take one more step forward. His patience gives room for growth, for healing, and for transformation at a pace that honors the fragility of the human heart. Today, his patience continues to be a comfort for anyone who feels behind, for anyone who struggles with faith, for anyone who repeats old mistakes. His compassion says, "Take your time. I am with you. Keep walking." His love does not rush. His compassion does not expire. His patience remains steady, inviting every believer into a journey shaped not by pressure, but by grace. Part 15. Compassion that saw beyond the surface. Jesus had an extraordinary ability to look beyond outward appearances and see the deeper realities of a person's heart. While others judged by reputation, status, or behavior, Jesus saw beneath the surface, into the wounds, desires, fears, and potential that lay hidden within each soul. This insight allowed his compassion to reach people others misunderstood. Take Nathanael, for example. Before they had even spoken, Jesus said, "Here is a true Israelite, in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael was stunned. Jesus saw the sincerity within him before a single word passed his lips. His compassion recognized virtue even when others failed to see it. We also see this in his conversation with the paralyzed man lowered through the roof. Everyone expected Jesus to heal the man's body immediately, but Jesus first addressed his deeper need. "Your sins are forgiven." He saw the burdens of guilt and shame weighing on the man, burdens far heavier than physical paralysis. Jesus' compassion touched the unseen wounds before the visible ones. When the rich young ruler approached him, Jesus looked into his heart and loved him, even though the young man struggled to surrender his possessions. Jesus did not judge him harshly. He saw the longing within him, the desire to find lasting meaning. His compassion met the young man's sincerity, even though he walked away grieving. Early believers took comfort in knowing that Jesus sees beyond surface flaws, failures, and facades. He sees the true intention of the heart, the quiet longing to do right, and the hidden battles no one else understands. Today, this truth reassures every listener. Jesus sees you, not the version others judge, but the reality of your heart. His compassion is shaped not by appearances, but by understanding. Part 16. Compassion that brought restoration through forgiveness. One of the most transformative expressions of Jesus' compassion was the forgiveness he offered, freely, generously, and without hesitation. His forgiveness restored those who believed they were beyond redemption and lifted burdens that had weighed heavily upon the heart for years. When Jesus forgave the paralyzed man, the religious leaders were shocked. To them, forgiveness was a privilege tightly controlled and surrounded by ritual. But Jesus offered it with authority and tenderness, revealing the heart of God, a heart eager to restore, not condemn. We see his forgiving compassion in the life of Matthew, the tax collector. Matthew's profession placed him among the most despised in society, yet Jesus called him to follow him. That simple act of choosing Matthew brought forgiveness, identity, and purpose to a man others refused to trust. But perhaps the clearest display of compassionate forgiveness was Jesus' encounter with the woman caught in adultery. Surrounded by anger and accusation, she stood in desperate need of mercy. Jesus stepped between her and her accusers, offering both protection and grace. His words, "Neither do I condemn you," lifted a burden she had carried for too long. He offered forgiveness that restored her dignity and gave her the strength to walk a new path. Jesus' compassion through forgiveness was not soft or permissive. It was powerful. It confronted sin with truth while offering hope for transformation. Early believers learned that divine forgiveness removes shame, restores relationships, and opens the heart to new beginnings. And today, his compassion still whispers the same truth. Forgiveness is not beyond reach. Grace is always available. Healing begins where mercy is welcomed. No matter the weight of past mistakes, Jesus' compassion offers restoration, dignity, and peace. Part 17. Compassion that lifted the burden of fear. Fear was a constant companion in the ancient world. Fear of illness, fear of political unrest, fear of spiritual failure, fear of the unknown. Yet again and again, Jesus' compassion reached into the hearts of those living with fear and replaced it with courage and peace. One of the clearest examples comes from the storm on the Sea of Galilee. The disciples, seasoned fishermen familiar with the water, found themselves overwhelmed by waves and wind. Their fear was so strong that they woke Jesus with desperate voices. "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Jesus stood, spoke a word, and the storm fell silent. But even more important than calming the sea was calming their hearts. His compassion reassured them that they were never beyond his care, not in danger, not in doubt, not in fear. We also see his compassion lifting the fear of Jairus, whose daughter lay dying. Fear pressed heavily upon Jairus as every moment slipped away. Yet when the message arrived that she had passed, Jesus responded with a simple, powerful reassurance. "Do not be afraid, only believe." His compassion acknowledged the reality of Jairus' fear, but offered courage greater than sorrow. Women, children, outcasts, and even religious leaders came to Jesus trembling, unsure of how he would respond. Yet his compassion always created safety. His presence softened fear, whether it arose from uncertainty, guilt, illness, or grief. Early believers found comfort in knowing that Jesus did not dismiss fear. He transformed it. His compassion did not demand instant bravery. It gently nurtured the heart toward trust. Today, his compassion speaks to every anxious and overwhelmed heart. You are safe with me, even in the storm, even in the unknown. His love casts out fear, not by force, but by presence. Part 18. Compassion that met people in their daily lives. Many of Jesus' most meaningful moments of compassion did not occur in dramatic settings. Instead, they unfolded in the ordinary rhythm of daily life, in homes, on roadsides, in markets, and in quiet conversations between friends. He visited Peter's house and healed his mother-in-law of a fever. It was not a public spectacle, nor a grand miracle meant to astonish crowds. It was a simple act of love for a family he cared about. His compassion entered the intimacy of daily living, into kitchens, sickbeds, and private struggles. He spoke to travelers on the road, such as the two disciples walking to Emmaus after his resurrection. Their hearts were troubled and confused, weighed down by grief. Jesus walked beside them, listening patiently to their concerns. He opened Scripture to them and restored their hope, not in a temple, not before a crowd, but in the quiet steps of a shared journey. He noticed the hunger of the crowds who followed him, not because they demanded his attention, but because he cared for their well-being. Before teaching, he ensured they were fed. Before sending them home, he tended to their needs. His compassion understood the importance of daily bread, daily comfort, and daily encouragement. His compassion also shone in moments of simple touch. A child climbing into his arms, a hand placed gently on the shoulder of someone grieving, a blessing spoken softly in a crowded place. These small moments revealed a love that was consistent, patient, and present in ordinary life. Early believers treasured these quieter expressions of compassion. They understood that Jesus' love was not only for moments of crisis, but for the everyday burdens people carry, the ones so familiar they are often ignored. And today, his compassion continues to move quietly through the routines of daily life. It comforts in traffic, strengthens during work, whispers peace at night, and brings warmth into ordinary moments. His presence is not confined to extraordinary events. It walks with us in the gentle rhythm of every day. Part 19. Compassion that brought peace to troubled minds. Throughout his ministry, Jesus encountered people weighed down by inner turmoil, anxieties they could not name, fears they carried silently, and thoughts that left them restless and uncertain. His compassion reached into these unseen struggles with extraordinary gentleness, offering peace deeper than simple reassurance. One such moment occurred when Jesus crossed the lake and met a man living among the tombs, tormented day and night. Others saw him as dangerous, unpredictable, and beyond help. But Jesus saw the suffering hidden beneath his anguish. His compassion brought calm to a mind trapped in darkness. With a single word, Jesus brought quiet to the storm inside the man's heart, restoring clarity, peace, and dignity. Another moment came when his disciples were overwhelmed by spiritual worry. They struggled to understand his teachings, unsure of how to navigate the uncertainty ahead. Jesus spoke to them with tender clarity. "Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me." His compassion acknowledged the weight of their anxiety, but offered a peace strong enough to steady their spirits. He comforted Martha when she was overwhelmed with responsibilities. He guided Nicodemus through questions that troubled him in the night. He reassured Thomas, whose doubts weighed heavily upon him. His compassion brought peace, not by ignoring inner battles, but by entering them with understanding. Early believers found strength in this truth. Jesus brings peace to troubled minds, not by dismissing fears, but by meeting them with his presence. And today, his compassion still speaks to anxious hearts. It whispers calm into racing thoughts. It brings clarity to confusion. It replaces turmoil with a quiet confidence rooted in his love.
Part 20.
Compassion that honored the value of every person. In a culture where worth was often determined by status, wealth, or lineage, Jesus demonstrated that every human being, no matter their background, held immeasurable value in the sight of God. His compassion treated each person with dignity, reminding them that they were seen, known, and cherished. We see this in his interaction with the woman who anointed his feet with perfume. Others dismissed her as unworthy, yet Jesus honored her devotion and defended her against criticism. His compassion affirmed her value when others attempted to diminish her. We see it again when a poor widow placed 2 small coins into the temple treasury. To the crowd, her offering seemed insignificant, but Jesus saw the depth of her sacrifice. He spoke of her generosity with profound respect, revealing that God values the heart far more than outward appearances. We see it when he stopped to speak with Bartimaeus, a blind beggar sitting by the roadside. Though the crowd tried to silence him, Jesus called him forward with kindness. His compassion elevated those society tried to push into silence. And we see it in the way he treated his own disciples. Fishermen, tax collectors, ordinary men with fears and flaws. He entrusted them with his mission because he saw their worth long before they saw it in themselves. Early believers were deeply shaped by this truth. Jesus' compassion is rooted in the infinite value God places on every human life. Today, his compassion continues to affirm that no one is overlooked, no one is forgotten, no one is insignificant. His love recognizes the beauty, potential, and worth within each person, even when the world fails to see it. Part 21. Compassion that strengthened the weak. Many people who came to Jesus felt weak, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. They had lived through seasons of hardship that drained their strength and left them feeling powerless. Jesus' compassion did not shame them for their weakness. Instead, it became the very place where his strength was revealed. We see this with the man lowered through the roof by his friends. He had no strength to come on his own. His voice could not shout above the crowds. His body could not carry him to the feet of Jesus. Yet Jesus honored the faith of those who carried him and met the man's weakness with mercy. He lifted both his body and his spirit, giving him the strength to rise and walk. We see this again with the woman bent over for 18 years. Her weakness had become a part of her identity, something she carried day after day. Yet Jesus called her forward with affection, laying his hands gently upon her. His compassion restored her strength, allowing her to stand tall once more. Even the disciples knew this aspect of his compassion. In moments when they faltered, during storms, during trials, during confusion, Jesus strengthened them. When Peter stumbled, Jesus restored him. When Thomas doubted, Jesus reassured him. When they felt overwhelmed by the mission ahead, Jesus promised them his presence and his spirit. Early believers found comfort in knowing that Jesus does not require perfect strength. His compassion meets people in their limitations and lifts them with grace. Today, his compassion still says, "Where you are weak, I am strong. Come as you are." His strength is not distant. It is near, steady, and overflowing with kindness.
Part 22.
Compassion that brought clarity to the confused. Confusion is a quiet burden that many carry. Questions about life, purpose, faith, and the future often cloud the mind, leaving people uncertain about their next steps. Jesus' compassion responded to confusion not with impatience, but with gentle clarity. One example is his conversation with Nicodemus, a respected teacher who came to Jesus at night. Nicodemus carried questions he could not ask publicly, questions that weighed heavily on his heart. Instead of dismissing him, Jesus welcomed him into deep conversation. He explained truth with patience, guiding Nicodemus toward understanding. His compassion made space for questions and honored the sincerity of a searching heart. We see this again on the road to Emmaus. Two disciples walked with heavy confusion, unsure how to make sense of Jesus' death and the rumors of his resurrection. Jesus joined them quietly, listening before explaining. Step by step, he opened Scripture, unveiling meaning they had missed. Their confusion turned to clarity, and their sorrow turned to joy. Even the disciples experienced moments when understanding seemed just out of reach. Jesus used parables, stories, and illustrations to gently open their minds. He repeated truths when needed. He guided them patiently toward deeper comprehension. His compassion did not demand instant understanding. It honored the process of learning, the journey of questioning, the slow unfolding of wisdom. Early believers cherished this kindness. They realized that confusion was not failure, it was an invitation to draw closer to Jesus. Today, his compassion continues to meet every questioning heart with patience and illumination. His presence brings clarity, one gentle truth at a time. Part 23. Compassion that brought community to the lonely. Loneliness is one of the heaviest burdens a person can carry. It affects not only the heart, but the spirit. In the time of Jesus, loneliness often came through illness, social rejection, or circumstances that set people apart from their neighbors. Jesus' compassion consistently drew the lonely back into connection, restoring community where separation once ruled. Consider the lepers who lived outside the city gates. They were physically isolated and emotionally forgotten, forced to live away from their families and friends. When Jesus healed them, his compassion did more than restore their bodies, it restored their place in society. They could return home, embrace loved ones, and re-enter the rhythms of communal life. We see this same compassion in his interaction with the man possessed by demons in the region of the Gerasenes. After Jesus healed him, the man sat at his feet, clothed and in his right mind. His loneliness had been replaced by communion, clarity, and belonging. Jesus did not merely free him from torment, he returned him to a community that could now receive him with joy. Jesus also extended compassion to those whose loneliness was emotional rather than physical. Mary Magdalene, once tormented by spiritual oppression, found a place among his followers. Zacchaeus, who lived in social isolation because of his occupation, discovered fellowship through Jesus' acceptance. Even Matthew, the tax collector, found himself welcomed into a family of believers who walked and learned together. Early Christians cherished these stories because they understood what loneliness felt like, the separation created by persecution, by distance, and by hardships. Jesus' compassion assured them that no one was meant to carry life alone. Today, his compassion continues to lift the lonely into community. It reminds every person that they are seen, they are valued, they have a place.
Part 24.
Compassion that encouraged faith to grow. Faith is not always strong or steady. Sometimes it flickers like a candle in the wind, wavering under pressure. Jesus understood this deeply, and his compassion nurtured the faith of those who were struggling, meeting them where they were and helping them take the next step. We see this with the father who cried out, "I believe, help my unbelief." His faith was mixed with doubt, courage mingled with fear. Yet Jesus did not criticize him or ask him to be stronger. His compassion responded to the father's honesty, healing the boy and strengthening the man's trembling belief. We see it with the woman who reached through the crowd for Jesus' garment. Her faith was quiet, fragile, and filled with uncertainty. Yet Jesus honored it with gentleness. Your faith has made you well. His compassion nurtured a small spark of faith into something radiant. Even Peter's faith wavered when he walked on the water. For a moment, his confidence faltered and fear overwhelmed him. Jesus immediately reached out his hand, not with anger, but with compassion that lifted him from the waves and restored his trust. The disciples often struggled to understand, yet Jesus patiently guided them. His compassion did not demand perfect faith. It encouraged growing faith. Early Christians found tremendous comfort in this truth. Their faith was tested by persecution, uncertainty, and hardship. Knowing that Jesus responded compassionately to weak and wavering faith gave them strength to continue. And today, his compassion continues to nurture faith of all sizes: strong faith, uncertain faith, new faith, and faith mixed with questions. He honors every step toward him, no matter how small. Part 25. Compassion that restored purpose. Jesus' compassion did not simply comfort people, it restored purpose to lives that felt directionless or forgotten. Many who encountered him had lost their sense of meaning. Some had abandoned dreams. Others believed their past failures defined the rest of their lives. But when Jesus looked at them, he saw their potential, their gifts, and the calling that lay beneath their pain. Think of Matthew sitting at his tax booth. His work had consumed him, shaping his identity and separating him from his community. Yet Jesus approached him with a simple invitation. "Follow me." That moment of compassion transformed Matthew's purpose. He left behind the weight of his past and stepped into a calling that would impact generations through the gospel he later wrote. We see this again with the Samaritan woman at the well. After her encounter with Jesus, she ran back to her town, not in shame, but with excitement, telling others about the one who knew her completely and loved her still. The compassion she received awakened a new mission. She became a messenger of hope in her community. Even Peter, who denied Jesus, had his purpose restored by compassion. Jesus did not dismiss him or replace him. Instead, he entrusted him with the care of his followers. "Feed my sheep." Compassion transformed Peter's failure into leadership and courage. Early believers learned that Jesus' compassion does more than heal wounds. It calls people into meaningful lives. It awakens purpose, renews passion, and invites each person into a story greater than themselves. Today, his compassion still restores purpose. It lifts those who feel lost. It guides those unsure of their direction. And it reminds every believer that their life carries value, meaning, and divine intention.
Part 26. Compassion that revealed the heart of God. Every act of compassion shown by Jesus revealed something profound about the nature of God. His kindness reflected God's character. His gentleness mirrored God's patience. His mercy displayed God's heart for every human soul. When Jesus healed, God's mercy was revealed. When Jesus forgave, God's grace was revealed. When Jesus wept, God's tenderness was revealed. When Jesus listened, God's understanding was revealed. When Jesus welcomed the outcast, God's inclusive love was revealed. For those who witnessed his ministry, compassion was not simply something Jesus displayed, it was evidence of who God truly is. His compassion tore down false ideas of a distant or harsh deity and revealed a father who moves toward his children with deep affection. This truth strengthened the early church. They understood that when they prayed, they were speaking to a God whose heart was full of compassion. When they suffered, they trusted that God understood their pain. When they stumbled, they relied on his mercy to lift them again. Everything they learned about God was shaped by the compassion they saw in Jesus. And today, this remains the foundation of Christian faith. To look at Jesus is to see the compassionate heart of God. His love is not temporary or limited. It is eternal, patient, and overflowing.
Part 27. Compassion in everyday moments. Jesus showed compassion not only in miracles, but in the simple moments that filled each day. He cared for people during ordinary conversations, quiet walks, and small encounters that did not seem important to others. His compassion was steady, gentle, and always present. When people gathered around him, he noticed their tired faces and their heavy hearts. He spoke words that brought comfort. He reminded them that God knew their needs and saw their struggles. Jesus showed that compassion is not only for dramatic moments, it can also be expressed through small acts of kindness. He blessed children who came to him. He listened to people who felt confused. He encouraged his disciples when they struggled to understand. In these daily moments, Jesus revealed that compassion is a way of life. His compassion teaches us that the simple acts we offer to others can bring great healing. A kind word, a patient conversation, or a gentle smile can lift someone who feels alone. Jesus showed that compassion can flow quietly, yet still change lives.
Part 28. Compassion that brings peace. One of the greatest gifts Jesus offered was peace. His words and his presence brought calm into places filled with worry. When people felt afraid, his compassion reminded them that they were not alone. Jesus often said, "Peace be with you." These words carried comfort. They helped people breathe easier and trust that God was near. Even when circumstances were difficult, his compassion brought stillness to the heart. When the disciples were troubled, Jesus reassured them. He told them not to let their hearts be afraid. His compassion reached into their fear and softened it with hope. His peace was gentle, steady, and stronger than their worries. Today, this same compassion brings peace to our lives. When we face uncertainty, his words remind us to rest in God's care. When we feel overwhelmed, his presence brings comfort. His compassion gives peace that is quiet, lasting, and deeper than the challenges we face. Part 29. Compassion that walked with the broken. There were many people in Scripture who felt broken by life, broken by mistakes, broken by loss, or broken by years of disappointment. Jesus did not avoid these people. He walked beside them with patience, kindness, and a compassion that reached beyond their pain. When he approached the widow at Nain, he met her in one of the darkest moments a person can endure. Her only son had died, and she walked in the funeral procession surrounded by grief. Jesus saw her tears, and Scripture says his heart was moved. He touched the coffin, spoke life into the situation, and restored her hope with a miracle that only compassion could inspire. We see this again when he approached people weighed down by shame. Instead of turning away, he stepped into their stories with gentleness. His compassion brought courage to those who had lost their strength. It brought dignity to those who felt forgotten. It brought light into hearts that had grown weary. Jesus never rushed the brokenhearted. He never demanded they be stronger. Instead, he stayed close. He listened. He lifted burdens one moment at a time. Early Christians held tightly to this truth. Jesus walks with those who feel broken, and he does not leave them where he found them. Today, his compassion still meets every broken place with hope. Where the heart aches, he brings comfort. Where strength fades, he brings renewal. Where the future seems uncertain, he brings steady guidance. His compassion walks with us, step by step.
Part 30. Compassion that renewed joy. Joy often fades slowly, worn down by the pressures of life. Many who came to Jesus were searching for joy they had lost long ago. His compassion renewed that joy in ways both quiet and profound. At weddings, at tables, and in shared meals, Jesus brought warmth and connection. He celebrated with families. He welcomed those who felt out of place. His compassion created spaces where people could breathe again and rediscover the simple joys of life. One beautiful example is found in his first recorded miracle, turning water into wine at the wedding in Cana. This was not a moment of crisis or tragedy. It was a moment of celebration. And yet Jesus cared enough to preserve the joy of the occasion. His compassion noticed even the small embarrassments a family might face and gently restored peace to their hearts. We also see his compassion renewing joy when he restored people to community. The healed leper who returned to embrace his family. The blind men who opened their eyes to see sunlight for the first time. The crippled man who leapt with excitement as strength returned to his legs. Compassion turned sorrow into celebration. Jesus reminded people that joy is not beyond reach. It can return. It can be renewed. It can be restored even after long seasons of heaviness. Early believers drew strength from this truth. They faced persecution, hardship, and loss, yet they remembered that Jesus brought joy wherever he went. His compassion lifted their spirits, reminding them of hope beyond their circumstances. Today, his compassion continues to renew joy in quiet, unexpected ways. Through moments of gratitude, through healing, through peace that settles in the heart, through the simple reminder that God is near.
Part 31. Compassion that lifted those burdened by life. Many people who approached Jesus were carrying burdens they had held for years, burdens of responsibility, guilt, exhaustion, and disappointment. Though these burdens were not always visible to others, Jesus saw them clearly. His compassion reached into the weight people carried and gently lifted it from their shoulders. We see this in his invitation. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. These were not just poetic words. They were a promise. They were spoken to farmers exhausted from labor, mothers carrying the weight of their families, fathers struggling to provide, and young people searching for direction. His compassion offered rest not only for the body, but for the soul. He carried the burdens of his disciples when they felt overwhelmed. When they faced challenges that seemed too great, he reminded them that his strength would carry them forward. His compassion became their support when their own strength began to fail. He lifted burdens through forgiveness. He lifted them through healing. He lifted them through kindness that broke through guilt and replaced it with peace. Early Christians treasured this truth. Many of them lived under the heavy pressures of persecution, poverty, and uncertainty. Yet they found comfort in knowing Jesus understood their burdens and carried them with compassion. Even today, his compassion continues to lift the weight people carry. It brings peace to the anxious. It brings comfort to the overwhelmed. It brings rest to the weary. His compassion reminds us that we never walk alone.
Part 32. Compassion that revealed true greatness. In the world Jesus lived in, greatness was often measured by status, wealth, or power. But Jesus redefined greatness in a way the world had never seen. He showed that true greatness comes through humility, service, and genuine compassion for others. One powerful example came when the disciples argued about who among them was the greatest. Jesus responded not with anger, but with a gentle lesson. He brought a child into their midst and said, "Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." His compassion taught them that greatness is not found in how much authority a person has, but in how deeply they care for others. He demonstrated this truth throughout his ministry. He washed the feet of his disciples, performing a task normally given to servants. He welcomed the poor, the sick, and the overlooked with honor. His compassion elevated those who were often ignored, reminding the world that every act of kindness carries eternal value. Even on the night before his crucifixion, when his own suffering was near, he encouraged his disciples. He prayed for them. He comforted them. His compassion revealed a greatness rooted in love rather than power. Early believers carried this lesson into their communities. They cared for the poor, supported widows, and welcomed strangers because they understood that compassion was the highest expression of greatness. Today, his example continues to shape hearts. Greatness is seen in the one who listens with patience, in the one who serves with humility, in the one who loves with compassion. Jesus redefined greatness forever, and his followers continue to reflect that truth.
Part 33. Compassion that invited people into God's family. One of the most beautiful expressions of Jesus' compassion was the way he invited people into the family of God. He welcomed those who felt distant, forgotten, or disqualified. Through his words and his actions, he offered belonging to people who had never experienced it before. When he told his followers, "Whoever does the will of my Father is my brother and sister and mother," he was opening the door to a family far greater than earthly ties.
His compassion created a spiritual home for all who sought God with sincere hearts. We see this compassion in his conversations with those who felt outside the reach of grace. The Samaritan woman, the tax collectors, the sinners, each one found themselves welcomed into a community they never expected. Jesus' invitation showed them that God's family was not limited by background, nationality, or reputation. It was open to anyone willing to receive his love. We also see this when he blessed children. His disciples tried to send them away, thinking Jesus had more important matters to address. But Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me." In doing so, he reminded the world that God's family includes the smallest, the weakest, and the overlooked. Early believers found comfort in knowing that Jesus' compassion did not only heal or teach, it also welcomed. It created unity where division once existed. It brought people together in love, forming communities built on faith and grace rather than status or power. Today, his compassion continues to invite people into God's family. It reminds us that we're not alone. We belong to something greater than ourselves. We're part of a family rooted in love, forgiveness, and hope.
Part 34. Compassion that brought courage to the discouraged. Discouragement can settle over the heart like a heavy cloud. Many people Jesus encountered felt discouraged because of repeated failures, unanswered prayers, or long seasons of waiting. Jesus met these people with compassion that rekindled courage and renewed their strength. We see this in his interaction with his disciples after a long night of fruitless fishing. They had worked hard, yet caught nothing. Their efforts felt wasted, and discouragement weighed on them. Jesus called out from the shore, instructing them to cast their net again. When the net filled with fish, his compassion restored their confidence and reminded them that their work was not in vain. We see it again when Peter denied him 3 times. Shame and discouragement overwhelmed Peter so deeply that he returned to fishing, unsure of his future. Yet Jesus met him on the shore, shared a meal with him, and gently restored him. His compassion turned Peter's discouragement into determination and courage. Even after the resurrection, when some disciples doubted what they had heard, Jesus did not dismiss them. His compassion gave them time to understand. He encouraged them, showed them his wounds, and reminded them of their mission. Early Christians often felt discouraged under the pressures of persecution and hardship. The stories of Jesus strengthening the discouraged gave them hope. They understood that Jesus did not abandon people in moments of weakness. He encouraged them until their hearts found strength again. Today, his compassion still brings courage to all who feel weary. When hope fades, he speaks life. When strength fails, he lifts the heart. When discouragement grows, his compassion reminds us that God is not finished with our story.
Part 35. Compassion that reached the hungry and the poor. Jesus' compassion extended to those who struggled with the basic needs of life. Hunger, poverty, and hardship were realities for many in his time. Jesus did not overlook these struggles. He responded with kindness, understanding, and the desire to meet both physical and spiritual needs. One of the most well-known examples is the feeding of the 5,000. A large crowd had gathered to hear him teach. As the day grew late, they grew hungry. The disciples suggested that the people be sent away to find food. But Jesus looked upon the crowd with compassion. He saw not just their physical hunger, but their spiritual longing as well. With a few loaves and fish, he provided abundantly, showing that God cares for every detail of human life. We also see his compassion in smaller, simpler moments. He noticed the poor widow who placed 2 small coins into the temple treasury. Others saw only a tiny gift, but Jesus saw the sacrifice behind it.
His compassion honored her offering, reminding his followers that God values the heart more than the amount. He spoke about caring for the poor, feeding the hungry, and clothing those in need, not as distant ideals, but as expressions of God's heart. His compassion taught that every act of kindness, no matter how small, carries eternal value. Early Christians practiced this compassion by caring for widows, sharing resources, and supporting one another. Their communities became places where God's love was made visible through generosity and service. Today, His compassion still calls us to see the needs around us, to offer help where we can, to encourage those facing hardship, to remember that God's love flows through acts of kindness that meet both physical and spiritual needs.
Part 36. Compassion that transformed sorrow into hope. Sorrow is a universal experience. Jesus encountered many who were weighed down by grief, loss, and deep sadness. Yet his compassion brought hope into places where despair seemed to have settled permanently. When he met Mary and Martha after Lazarus' death, he did not ignore their sorrow. He wept with them. His compassion embraced their grief fully, but it also pointed them toward hope, showing them that God's power reaches even into the valley of death. He spoke life where there was loss and comfort where there was heartbreak. We see this again when he comforted Jairus, whose daughter lay dying. His compassionate words, "Do not be afraid, only believe," carried hope into a moment filled with fear. His presence transformed sorrow into expectation, and his miracle restored joy to a family overwhelmed by grief. Jesus also spoke of a future hope that sorrow could not erase. He told his followers, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." These words assured them that God sees every tear and that no sorrow is unnoticed. The early church held tightly to this promise. They faced loss, persecution, and hardship, yet they found hope through the compassion of Christ, a hope that reached beyond circumstances and pointed toward eternal comfort. Today, his compassion still transforms sorrow. It whispers peace to the grieving. It brings light into dark seasons. It reminds us that sorrow is not the end of the story.
Part 37. Compassion for those searching for truth. Many people who came to Jesus were not looking for healing or miracles. They were searching for truth. They carried questions about God, about life, and about their purpose. Jesus welcomed these seekers with compassion, never turning them away or dismissing their questions. We see this in his conversation with Nicodemus. Nicodemus came at night, unsure and cautious, but hungry to understand. Jesus spoke to him with patience. He guided him gently into deeper truth, revealing the mystery of spiritual rebirth. His compassion allowed Nicodemus to ask freely, to wrestle with what he heard, and to discover truth step by step. We see this again in the rich young ruler who approached Jesus with a sincere question: "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus' compassion did not condemn the man's struggle with wealth. Instead, Scripture says he looked at him and loved him. His answer was shaped by compassion, a desire to lead the young man into a deeper freedom. Even the disciples often came to Jesus confused about his teachings. His compassion made room for their questions. He explained parables, clarified truths, and taught them again and again. Their questions did not frustrate him. They were welcomed as part of their growth. Early Christians were comforted by this aspect of his compassion.
They lived in a world of competing beliefs and philosophies. Knowing that Jesus welcomed seekers encouraged them to pursue truth boldly and honestly. Today, his compassion still invites every searching heart to come closer, to ask questions without fear, to seek truth with courage, to trust that God welcomes those who are still learning, still growing, and still exploring the depths of faith.
Part 38. Compassion that gave second chances. Jesus' compassion shined brightest when he offered second chances to people who believed they had run out of them. His ministry is filled with moments where he restored hope to those who felt they had failed too deeply to recover. Peter is one of the clearest examples. After denying Jesus 3 times, Peter believed his future was ruined. Shame weighed heavily on him. Yet Jesus, after his resurrection, met Peter on the shore and restored him gently. "Do you love me?" he asked, not once, but 3 times, giving Peter a chance to rise from each denial. His compassion did not erase the past, but transformed it into a testimony of grace. We also see this with the woman caught in adultery. Her accusers wanted judgment. Jesus offered mercy. He protected her from those who sought to condemn her and spoke the compassionate words that reshaped her life. "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." His compassion gave her a chance to start again, with dignity, with hope, and with a future. Even the thief on the cross received a second chance. In his final moments, he turned to Jesus with a simple request, "Remember me." Jesus answered with compassion that reached beyond the grave. "Today you will be with me in paradise." His compassion extended redemption when all seemed lost. Early Christians drew strength from these moments, knowing that failure was not final. Jesus' compassion offered new beginnings, fresh hope, and the opportunity to rise again. Today, second chances still flow from his compassion. He restores those who fall. He lifts those who stumble. He invites every heart to begin anew.
Part 39. Compassion that protected the vulnerable. Jesus consistently used his voice, his authority, and his presence to protect those who were vulnerable. The vulnerable were not only the poor or the sick, but also those who lacked power, who had no defenders, or who lived under the weight of society's harsh judgment. One of the most striking examples occurred when the woman caught in adultery was dragged before him. The crowd gathered with stones in hand, ready to destroy her. Jesus placed himself between her and her accusers. With wisdom and compassion, he dismantled their hostility by saying, "Let the one without sin cast the first stone." Not only did he spare her life, but he restored her dignity in a moment filled with shame. We also see his protective compassion when he spoke against leaders who placed heavy burdens on ordinary people. He challenged systems that harmed the weak. His compassion was strong enough to defend the defenseless and gentle enough to lift those who had no one else to stand for them. When parents brought their children to him, the disciples tried to send them away, but Jesus corrected them, saying, "Let the little children come to me." In that moment, he protected the smallest and most vulnerable among them, showing the world that every life matters to God. Early Christians saw in Jesus a protector, a shepherd who guarded his flock, comforted the weak, and confronted injustice. His compassion was not passive, it was a shield for the vulnerable. Today, his compassion still protects. It guards hearts in moments of fear. It strengthens those who feel exposed or alone. And it reminds us that God stands with those who have no one else to defend them.
Part 40. Compassion that revealed the value of mercy. Mercy was one of the central themes of Jesus' ministry. He taught his followers that compassion is not complete without mercy. and he revealed that mercy is at the very heart of God's character. When he healed the sick, he showed mercy. When he forgave sinners, he showed mercy. When he restored the brokenhearted, he showed mercy. Each act revealed the deep gentleness of God's love toward humanity. One powerful lesson came when Jesus shared the parable of the Good Samaritan. A man lay injured on the road while others passed him by. But the Samaritan, someone culturally viewed as an outsider, showed mercy. He cared for the man's wounds, brought him to safety, and ensured he received further help. Jesus ended the story by saying, "Go and do likewise." His compassion invited his followers not only to receive mercy, but to extend it. We see mercy again in his teaching about forgiveness. Peter once asked how many times he should forgive someone, perhaps 7 times? Jesus answered with a number so large it was impossible to count. His message was clear. Mercy should flow without limit, because God's mercy toward us is without limit. Even when Jesus hung on the cross, his compassion expressed mercy. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." In a moment of unimaginable pain, he chose mercy. Early believers treasured this truth. Mercy shaped their communities, guided their decisions, and strengthened their unity. It became a defining mark of the church. Today, his compassion still teaches us that mercy breathes life into relationships, heals wounds, and reflects the heart of God more clearly than anything else. Part 41. Compassion that called people into rest. Rest was a central theme in Jesus' ministry, not only physical rest, but rest for the soul. He understood how exhaustion, emotional, spiritual, or physical, slowly wears down the human heart. His compassion offered a rest that reached far deeper than sleep or quiet moments. He spoke the comforting words, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." This invitation was not limited to one group. It was for the weary mother, the anxious father, the struggling worker, the discouraged disciple, and every soul longing for peace. We see Jesus' compassion in moments where he intentionally led his disciples away from the crowds. When they were overwhelmed or tired, he brought them to solitary places where they could breathe, pray, and recover strength. His compassion recognized their limits and gave them space to be renewed. He offered rest to hearts troubled by guilt through forgiveness. He offered rest to minds overwhelmed by worry through reassurance. He offered rest to spirits weighed down by fear through his presence. Early Christians lived in a world full of pressure and persecution. Jesus' promise of rest brought them comfort and carried them through difficult seasons. They understood that rest was not found in escaping their circumstances, but in drawing close to Christ. Today, his compassion continues to offer rest for every burdened heart. Rest from worry, rest from fear, rest from striving. Rest in the assurance that God holds our lives in his hands. Part 42. Compassion that healed not only bodies, but hearts. While Jesus performed many physical healings, his compassion always went beyond the surface. He healed hearts, restored dignity, and brought emotional and spiritual renewal to those who came to him. Consider the man with leprosy.
His body suffered, but so did his spirit. He lived in isolation, cut off from family and community. When Jesus reached out and touched him, he healed more than skin. He healed years of rejection and loneliness. His compassion restored the heart. We see this again in the healing of the blind men. Jesus restored their sight, but he also restored their hope. Blindness in those days caused people to depend on others for everything. His compassion gave them freedom, independence, and joy that reached far deeper than the physical miracle. When he healed the paralyzed man, Jesus first forgave his sins. He addressed the deeper wounds, the weight of guilt, the fear of judgment, the longing for a fresh start. Then he healed his body. His compassion always looked at the whole person. Even the woman who touched his garment experienced more than physical healing. Jesus turned to her, called her daughter, and spoke peace into her spirit. His compassion restored identity, belonging, and inner confidence. Early believers carried these lessons into their own ministry. They cared not only for physical needs, but for emotional and spiritual ones as well. They understood that compassion touches every part of a person's life. Today, his compassion continues to heal hearts. It mends broken spirits. It restores identity. It brings peace to places that hurt the most.
Part 43. Compassion that entered into human pain. Jesus did not observe human suffering from a distance. He stepped into it fully, sharing in the pain and struggles of the people around him. His compassion was not theoretical, it was deeply personal, expressed through presence, empathy, and genuine understanding. When he stood at the tomb of Lazarus, Scripture tells us Jesus wept. Even though he knew resurrection was moments away, his compassion compelled him to feel the sorrow of his friends. He entered their grief before he brought them joy. He understood hunger, thirst, and fatigue. He understood loneliness, rejection, and betrayal. He understood what it felt like to walk through moments of darkness. His compassion grew from this understanding, allowing him to comfort others in their suffering with unmatched depth. When people cried out to him, whether with words or silent tears, Jesus responded with tenderness. The hurting found a safe place in his presence. The broken found comfort. The grieving found hope. Early Christians found great comfort in knowing that Jesus understood pain firsthand. This truth gave them courage as they faced persecution, loss, and hardship. They knew their Savior was not distant from human suffering. Today, his compassion still enters our pain. He understands every tear. He hears every wordless prayer. He stands close to every heart carrying sorrow. His compassion brings comfort even when the solution is not yet visible. Part 44. Compassion that guided people gently back to God. Many people who came to Jesus had drifted away from God. Some felt unworthy, others felt confused or ashamed. But Jesus did not push them away. His compassion gently guided them back into relationship with God, inviting them to rediscover hope, faith, and spiritual purpose. We see this with the tax collectors who shared meals with him. They had been pushed out of religious life, labeled as sinners and traitors. Yet Jesus sat at their tables, spoke with them, and called them into transformation. His compassion restored their spiritual identity. We see it with the Samaritan woman, whose life had wandered far from God's design. Yet Jesus approached her with truth wrapped in compassion. His words awakened her heart and sent her running to share the good news with her entire town. We see it with the disciples themselves. When they doubted, he taught them. When they feared, he reassured them. When they lost their way, he guided them back. His compassion made room for questions, mistakes, and growth. Even those who opposed him were not outside his compassion. When he cried out from the cross, "Father, forgive them," he prayed for those who misunderstood him, rejected him, and caused him suffering. His compassion extended even to his enemies. Early Christians saw in Jesus the perfect reflection of God's heart, a heart eager to welcome anyone who turned toward him. They carried this truth into their communities, offering grace to those who sought repentance and hope. Today, his compassion still guides people gently back to God. It invites the wandering. It restores the weary. It welcomes the repentant. His compassion lights the path home.
Part 45. Compassion that brought light into moments of doubt. Doubt is a quiet struggle that touches nearly every heart at some point. Many of Jesus' followers wrestled with questions, uncertainty, and moments where their faith felt fragile. Jesus never shamed them for this. Instead, his compassion brought light into their doubt, guiding them back to confidence and peace. Consider Thomas, who struggled to believe in the resurrection without seeing physical proof. Jesus did not rebuke him harshly. He appeared to Thomas, invited him to touch his wounds, and gently said, "Do not be unbelieving, but believe." His compassion met Thomas exactly where he was, honest, unsure, and longing for clarity. We see this again with the disciples in the storm. Fear clouded their confidence, and doubt crept into their hearts. Jesus calmed the sea and then asked, "Why are you so afraid? Where is your faith?" His questions were not harsh. They were compassionate invitations to trust more deeply. John the Baptist, even after proclaiming Jesus as the Messiah, experienced doubt while imprisoned. He sent messengers to ask Jesus if he truly was the one. Jesus responded with compassion, pointing John to the miracles, the healings, and the fulfillment of prophecy. He strengthened John's faith without condemnation. Early believers cherished these moments. They realized that doubt did not disqualify them from God's love. Jesus' compassion guided them through uncertainty, shaping their faith rather than shattering it. Today, his compassion still meets every heart that wrestles with doubt. He brings clarity where confusion settles. He brings reassurance where fear whispers. He brings light into the shadows of uncertainty. His compassion strengthens faith one step at a time. Part 46. Compassion that saw the forgotten. Throughout his ministry, Jesus had a remarkable ability to see those whom society ignored. People who felt invisible in the world found themselves noticed, welcomed, and valued by him. His compassion reached those who lived on the edges, economically, socially, or emotionally. One example is Bartimaeus, a blind beggar sitting by the roadside. The crowd viewed him as a nuisance, telling him to be quiet when he cried out to Jesus. But Jesus stopped. He called Bartimaeus forward and spoke to him directly, restoring not only his sight, but his dignity. His compassion made the invisible seen. We see this again with the woman who anointed Jesus with costly perfume. Others judged her actions, but Jesus defended her. He saw her devotion, her gratitude, and the depth of her love. His compassion lifted her above the criticism of others. He noticed the poor widow giving her 2 small coins. While others overlooked her offering, Jesus honored it, declaring that she had given more than all the others because she gave from her heart. His compassion valued the unseen sacrifice of an unnoticed woman. Even children, often overlooked in ancient culture, were brought into his arms. His compassion reminded the world that every life, whether large or small, carries tremendous worth. Early believers found purpose in this truth. They formed communities that cared for the overlooked, welcomed strangers, and supported the weak. They reflected the compassion of Christ by seeing those the world forgot. Today, his compassion still sees the forgotten. He notices the lonely, hears the quiet prayers. He honors the unseen sacrifices. His compassion reminds every believer that God sees them clearly, even when the world does not. Part 47. Compassion that brought healing through presence. There were many moments in Jesus' ministry where healing did not come through a dramatic miracle or a spoken command. Sometimes healing flowed simply through his presence. His nearness brought calm to troubled hearts, strength to weary souls, and courage to those who felt afraid. When he walked with the disciples on the road to Emmaus, they did not recognize him at first, but his presence alone brought warmth to their spirits. Later they said, "Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked with us?" His compassion brought healing long before they understood who he was. In the home of Jairus, when fear and grief filled the room, Jesus' quiet presence shifted the atmosphere. His compassion brought stillness into chaos. His nearness reminded them that hope was not lost. Even in the boat during the storm, before he calmed the winds, his presence comforted the disciples. They were terrified, but they were not alone. His compassion walked with them into the storm itself, showing that healing often begins simply by knowing God is near. Early Christians clung to this truth. They did not always see immediate miracles, but they felt God's peace through his presence. His compassion was their shelter in prisons, in hidden places, and in moments of fear. Today, his presence continues to heal. It brings peace into anxious minds. It brings warmth into lonely moments. It brings comfort into uncertain seasons. His compassion is felt not only in his works, but in his nearness.
Part 48. Compassion that brought truth with grace. Jesus never compromised the truth, yet he delivered it with grace so profound that even correction felt like an invitation rather than condemnation. His compassion shaped the way he taught, guided, and confronted hearts in need of change. When he spoke to the Samaritan woman about her life, he revealed truth that cut deeply, but he did it with compassion that lifted her, not crushed her. Truth became a doorway to transformation. When he confronted the Pharisees, his words were sharp, but his purpose was compassionate. He sought to free them from pride and the burden of legalism that chained others. His compassion was strong enough to challenge, but gracious enough to redeem. With his disciples, he guided them patiently. When they misunderstood his teachings, he clarified with gentleness. When they argued about who was greatest, he taught them humility with compassion. When they made mistakes, he restored them with grace. Truth without compassion becomes harsh. Compassion without truth becomes empty. Jesus held both perfectly. Early believers learned to speak truth in the same way, with kindness, patience, and genuine love. Their communities grew strong because truth and compassion walked hand in hand. Today, his compassion still guides hearts in truth. It leads us toward growth without shame. It teaches us without crushing us. It corrects us while drawing us closer to God. Jesus showed that true compassion does not ignore truth. It delivers truth with grace powerful enough to transform the soul.
Part 49. Compassion that drew near to the outcast. Throughout his ministry, Jesus reached out to people who lived at the edges of society, those others avoided, feared, or ignored. His compassion moved toward the outcast, reminding the world that God's love is not limited by social boundaries or human prejudice. We see this clearly in his interaction with the man possessed by many demons. The people of the region had chained him, abandoned him, and feared him. Yet Jesus stepped onto the shore with courage and compassion. He saw the person hidden beneath the torment. His compassion restored the man's mind and returned him to community clothed, calm, and renewed. We see it again with the leper who approached him. In those days, lepers were forced to live outside the city. No one touched them. Few even looked at them. But Jesus reached out his hand, touched the man, and said, "I am willing." His compassion tore through the walls of isolation. The same compassion reached the tax collector Matthew, who lived as an outcast by choice. Jesus invited him into discipleship, not after he changed, but so he could change. His compassion always saw the potential hidden in every heart. Early Christians were shaped by this truth. They welcomed people of every background, forming a community where slaves and freemen, rich and poor, Jews and Gentiles shared one table. Compassion broke down barriers that society upheld. Today, Jesus' compassion still reaches the outcast. It speaks to those who feel unseen. It lifts those who feel unworthy. It reminds every heart that God's love moves toward the overlooked, not away from them. Part 50. Compassion that gave strength for tomorrow. Jesus understood the weight of worry, especially the worry about tomorrow. People carried concerns about their families, their work, their future, their safety. His compassion spoke directly into these anxieties with words that brought comfort and stability. He said, "Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself." This was not a dismissal of real concerns. It was an invitation to trust that God holds the future with compassion and care. When he spoke about the lilies of the field and the birds of the air, he reminded people that God sustains all creation with love. If God provides for flowers and birds, how much more will he provide for his children? His compassion assured them that they were never outside of God's watchful care. When the disciples feared persecution, Jesus told them not to be afraid. He promised that God knew the number of hairs on their heads. His compassion strengthened them to face challenges with courage. We see this same compassion when he prepared his followers for his departure. He told them that he would not leave them as orphans. He promised the Holy Spirit, the Comforter, the Helper, to guide them into every tomorrow that lay ahead. Early Christians relied on these promises during seasons of uncertainty. They learned to face each new day not with fear, but with trust in God's compassionate presence. Today, his compassion still strengthens hearts for the days ahead. It reminds us that we are not alone in our struggles. It assures us that God goes before us, and it gives us courage to walk into tomorrow with confidence and peace.
Part 51. Compassion that embraced human weakness. Jesus understood the frailty of human nature. He saw how easy it was for people to grow tired, to become discouraged, to fall into temptation, or to lose their way. Yet he never responded with harshness. His compassion embraced human weakness and offered strength in its place. In the Garden of Gethsemane, when Jesus asked his disciples to stay awake and pray, they kept falling asleep. The weight of the night overwhelmed them. Yet Jesus did not lash out at them. Instead, he said, "The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." His compassion recognized their limitations and loved them despite them. We see this compassion when he restored Peter after his denial. Peter's weakness had led him into fear, but Jesus' compassion led him back into purpose. He did not shame Peter. Instead, he entrusted him with responsibility and affirmed his calling. We see it again when Jesus healed those who could not help themselves, the paralyzed, the blind, the oppressed. Their weakness did not repel him. It drew him closer. He understood that human weakness was not a barrier to God's love, but a place where God's compassion could shine brightest. Early believers found hope in this truth. They faced pressures and temptations that sometimes overwhelmed them.
Knowing Jesus embraced their weakness without rejection gave them courage to continue. Today, his compassion still embraces our weakness. He strengthens the faint-hearted. He comforts the overwhelmed. He lifts those who fall. His compassion meets us not at the peak of our strength, but in the reality of our humanity. Part 52. Compassion that never grew tired. One of the most remarkable qualities of Jesus' compassion is that it never faded, no matter how many demands were placed on him. People followed him everywhere, crowds pressing in, voices calling out, hands reaching toward him. Yet his compassion remained constant, unwavering, and abundant. At times, Jesus and his disciples were so surrounded by crowds that they could not find time to eat. Yet when he saw the people, he had compassion on them, for they were like sheep without a shepherd. Instead of turning them away, he taught them, fed them, and cared for them. We see his enduring compassion when he healed late into the evening, when he paused his journey to listen to someone in need, and when he welcomed interruptions as opportunities for love. His compassion was not limited by fatigue, inconvenience, or personal cost. Even when he was grieving the death of John the Baptist, the crowds found him. Instead of sending them away, Jesus healed their sick. His compassion overflowed even when his own heart was heavy. And perhaps the clearest example of his tireless compassion was the cross itself. In his deepest suffering, he prayed for his executioners. He comforted the thief beside him. He entrusted his mother to John. His compassion did not diminish, it increased. Early Christians marveled at this endless compassion. It gave them confidence that God's love would never run out no matter how many times they stumbled or called upon him. Today, his compassion is still tireless. He never stops listening. He never stops caring. He never grows weary of drawing near to his people. His compassion flows without limit, without hesitation, and without end.
Part 53. Compassion that restored joy in the midst of suffering. One of the most powerful qualities of Jesus' compassion is his ability to bring joy into places where suffering once lived. His presence turned moments of despair into scenes of celebration, and his words rekindled hope in hearts that had nearly given up. When he raised Jairus' daughter from death, joy filled a home that had been drowning in grief. His compassion transformed mourning into laughter. It turned sorrow into astonishment. It proved that God's love can reach into the deepest valleys and still bring forth light. We also see this in the healing of the crippled woman who had been bent over for 18 long years. When Jesus touched her, she immediately stood upright and began glorifying God. Her joy was contagious. The entire crowd rejoiced. His compassion restored years that suffering had stolen from her. Even the disciples experienced this joy. After the resurrection, their fear and confusion were replaced with overwhelming gladness when they saw Jesus alive. His compassion brought back the joy that had been buried under grief. Early Christians understood that joy was not dependent on circumstances, but on the presence of Christ. His compassion brought joy that persecution could not erase, hunger could not steal, and hardship could not destroy. Today, his compassion still restores joy. It lifts the heart in dark seasons. It brings hope where despair once lived. It reminds us that with God, joy can rise again even after long nights of sorrow. Part 54. Compassion that offered hope to the dying. Jesus' compassion reached even those facing death. He met them with tenderness, comfort, and the promise of eternal life, assurance that God's love extends far beyond the limits of this world. We see this in his encounter with the thief on the cross. In his final moments, with no opportunity to change his life or restore what had been broken, he turned to Jesus with a simple plea: "Remember me." Jesus responded with compassion deeper than words. Today, you will be with me in paradise. In the face of death, Jesus offered hope that outshined fear. We see this again when he spoke to Martha after her brother Lazarus died. He said, "I am the resurrection and the life." His compassion pointed beyond temporary sorrow to eternal promise. Even as tears fell, hope rose. His compassion comforted those grieving the deaths of loved ones. It reassured the brokenhearted that God sees every tear and holds every life, both now and forever. Early Christians relied on this truth as they faced persecution and martyrdom. They did not fear death because they knew Jesus' compassion had already conquered it. Today, his compassion still speaks hope to the dying and comfort to the grieving. It reminds us that this life is not the end. It assures us of eternal peace. It promises that every believer rests safely in God's hands.
Part 55. Compassion that encouraged the faithful in times of weakness. Even the most devoted followers experienced moments when their faith felt weak. Jesus understood this deeply. His compassion strengthened believers who struggled, not by demanding perfection, but by reminding them of God's unfailing presence. When the disciples could not cast out a demon, they felt embarrassed and confused. Instead of condemning them, Jesus taught them gently about faith and dependence on God. His compassion did not expose their weakness to shame them. It guided them toward deeper trust. We also see this when he comforted his followers before his arrest. They were afraid of what would happen, uncertain about their future. Jesus reassured them with the words, "Let not your heart be troubled." His compassion calmed their fears and reminded them that God had prepared a place for them and that he himself would guide them there. Even after the resurrection, when some doubted what they were seeing, Jesus approached them with gentleness. He invited them to touch his wounds and believe. His compassion made room for growing faith. Faith that was still learning, still stretching, still becoming stronger. Early Christians took this message to heart. They faced difficulties that tested their faith daily. Knowing that Jesus responded to weakness with compassion allowed them to persevere. Today, his compassion still encourages believers in their moments of weakness. It reminds us that faith is a journey. It assures us that God meets us where we are. It strengthens us when our own resolve feels fragile. Part 56. Compassion that spoke life into broken situations. Jesus often stepped into situations that seemed beyond repair, moments where hope was almost gone, where people believed nothing could change. His compassion carried authority, and with his words, life returned to places that had felt lifeless. When he reached the home of Jairus, mourners filled the air with sorrow. The situation appeared final, but Jesus spoke with compassion and power. "The child is not dead, but sleeping." His words pushed back despair and introduced the possibility no one imagined. Moments later, he took the girl by the hand and restored her to life. When the widow at Nain walked behind the coffin of her only son, Jesus stopped the procession. He touched the coffin and said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." His compassion brought a miracle into a moment of heartbreak, turning grief into joy. Even in less dramatic moments, his words brought life. To the discouraged, he spoke courage. To the fearful, he spoke peace. To the guilty, he spoke forgiveness. To the weary, he spoke rest. Early Christians lived by his words because they knew his compassion had the power to transform any situation. His voice was a source of hope, renewal, and strength. Today, his compassion still speaks life. It reminds us that no situation is too broken for God to restore. No darkness is too deep for his light, and no heart is too far gone for his healing.
Part 57. Compassion that invited people to start again. Many who encountered Jesus carried the weight of past mistakes. Some had made decisions they regretted. Others felt trapped by old habits or past failures. Jesus' compassion offered something they had never received before: permission to start again. We see this in his words to the woman caught in adultery. After protecting her from the crowd that sought her death, Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." He did not deny her past. He simply showed that her past did not have to define her future. His compassion opened the door to a new beginning. We also see this with Zacchaeus. His life as a dishonest tax collector had caused deep harm to others and isolated him from his community. But Jesus looked at him with compassion and said, "Today salvation has come to this house." Zacchaeus' heart changed immediately. He repaid what he had taken and began a new life shaped by generosity and integrity. Peter, too, received this gift. His denial of Jesus had broken his spirit, but Jesus restored him with love. Each time Peter affirmed his devotion, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you," Jesus gave him a renewed purpose. Early believers found hope in these stories. They lived in a world where failure often marked a person forever, but Jesus' compassion taught them that grace rewrites the story. Today, his compassion still invites people to start again. It gives courage to those burdened by guilt. It gives hope to those trapped in regret. It gives every believer a fresh beginning, shaped not by shame, but by grace. Part 58. Compassion that walked with people one step at a time. Jesus understood that transformation does not happen instantly. People grow slowly, they heal gradually, they learn day by day. His compassion walked with people at their own pace, never rushing them or demanding immediate change. With his disciples, we see this clearly. He taught them gently, repeating lessons as needed. When they misunderstood, he clarified. When they doubted, he reassured them. When they stumbled, he lifted them. His compassion shaped their journey, step by step. We see the same patient compassion with the crowds who followed him. Some came for healing, others came for teaching, and many came simply because they were searching. Jesus met each one where they were and guided them forward little by little. Even the early church grew through this patient compassion. Believers learned spiritual truths gradually. They practiced forgiveness, generosity, and unity as they matured. Jesus did not expect perfection. He desired faithfulness, even in small steps. His compassion today moves at the same gentle pace. He meets people in their process. He celebrates small victories. He understands slow growth. He walks with us one step at a time, leading us toward maturity and deeper faith.
Part 59. Compassion that offered guidance to the lost. Throughout his ministry, Jesus met many who felt lost. Lost in their circumstances, lost in their beliefs, or simply lost in life. His compassion did not judge them for wandering. Instead, he offered gentle guidance, showing them the way back to God. This is beautifully illustrated in the parable of the lost sheep. A shepherd leaves 99 sheep to search for the one that wandered away. When he finds it, he rejoices. Jesus spoke this parable to reveal God's compassion for those who feel far from him. The shepherd does not scold the sheep for getting lost. He carries it home with joy. We see this compassion in Jesus' invitation, "Follow me." These simple words offered direction and purpose to fishermen, to tax collectors, to the uncertain and the overlooked. His call brought clarity to hearts that had been drifting. We see it again in his teaching about the prodigal son. The father waits for his wandering child with open arms, ready to celebrate his return. Jesus used this story to show that God's compassion welcomes home anyone who seeks him, no matter how far they have traveled. Early believers treasured these teachings. Many had come from backgrounds filled with confusion, emptiness, or spiritual distance. Jesus' compassion guided them gently into truth and belonging.
Today, his compassion still guides the lost. It whispers hope into confusion. It shines light into darkness. It leads every wandering heart back to the Father's embrace. Part 60. Compassion that was present in silence. Not all compassion is expressed through words or actions. Sometimes compassion is found in silence, quiet presence, understanding without explanation, and peace that calms without speech. Jesus demonstrated this kind of compassion many times. When he stood with the woman caught in adultery, he first knelt and wrote in the dust. His silence protected her. His quietness slowed the anger of the crowd. His presence alone began the work of restoration before he even spoke. When he visited Jairus' home, surrounded by mourners, his silence carried authority and compassion. He did not debate or argue. He simply said the child was only asleep, and his calm presence overcame the noise of despair. When he prayed alone in quiet places, he showed compassion toward himself and his disciples by modeling rest and reflection. His silence became a sanctuary, a place where hearts could recalibrate and listen for God. Jesus also offered silent compassion in his suffering. Before many accusations, he remained quiet, not in defeat, but in strength. His silence revealed humility, patience, and love deeper than words. Early Christians understood that God speaks even through silence. In their times of persecution, when words were dangerous, they drew comfort from the quiet presence of Christ. Today, his compassion still flows through silence. It meets those who cannot find the right words. It comforts those who sit with unspoken pain. It surrounds every weary soul with peace that surpasses understanding.
Part 61. Compassion that loved without condition. One of the most remarkable aspects of Jesus' compassion is that it was not based on condition, performance, or worthiness. He loved people simply because they were God's children. His compassion flowed from who he was, not from who they were. He loved the disciples even when they doubted him. He loved Peter even after he denied him. He loved Thomas even when he questioned the resurrection. He loved the crowds even when they misunderstood him. He loved sinners even before they changed their ways. This unconditional compassion shocked the religious leaders of his day. They expected love to be earned, devotion to be proven, and acceptance to be reserved for the righteous. But Jesus loved freely, generously, and without hesitation. We see this unconditional love in his parables. The father runs toward the prodigal son before a word of apology is spoken. The shepherd searches for the lost sheep without blaming it for wandering. The man hosting the banquet welcomes the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the forgotten, not because they could repay him, but because compassion compelled him. Early Christians held tightly to this truth. They lived in a world where love was often conditional, based on status, wealth, or reputation. Jesus' compassion taught them a new way of living, a new way of loving, and a new way of seeing one another. Today, his compassion continues to love without conditions. It reaches us when we fail. It lifts us when we fall. It surrounds us before we ever earn it. His compassion is not a reward, it is a gift. Part 62. Compassion that offered forgiveness again and again. Forgiveness is one of the clearest expressions of Jesus' compassion. He did not forgive reluctantly or sparingly. He forgave readily, continually, and with a heart eager to restore. When Peter asked him, "How many times should I forgive? 7 times?" Jesus answered, 70 times 7. This was not a number to be counted, but a picture of limitless forgiveness reflecting the limitless compassion of God. Jesus forgave sins before people even asked. He forgave the paralyzed man. He forgave the woman who anointed his feet. He forgave his executioners as they nailed him to the cross. His forgiveness brought freedom to those trapped in guilt. It brought peace to those burdened by shame. It brought hope to those who believed they had gone too far. The early Christians held tightly to this truth. They lived in a world where love was often conditional, based on status, wealth, or reputation. Jesus' compassion taught them a new way of living, a new way of loving, and a new way of seeing one another. Today, his compassion continues to love without conditions. It reaches us when we fail. It lifts us when we fall. It surrounds us before we ever earn it. His compassion is not a reward, it is a gift.
Part 63. Compassion that brought healing to broken relationships. Jesus often stepped into situations where relationships were strained, fractured, or torn apart by anger, misunderstanding, or past mistakes. His compassion became a bridge, restoring what had been lost and bringing peace where conflict once lived. We see this in his teaching about forgiveness. When he encouraged his followers to reconcile with one another before offering gifts at the altar, he showed that compassion seeks unity. His teachings reminded people that relationships mattered deeply to God. We see this compassion at work when he restored Peter. Their relationship had been strained by Peter's denial, but Jesus approached him with gentleness. "Do you love me?" 3 times he asked, each question healing one wound created by Peter's failure. Compassion rebuilt what shame had damaged. We also see his compassion in the way he unified his disciples. They came from different backgrounds: fishermen, tax collectors, passionate nationalists, quiet thinkers. Yet Jesus patiently taught them to love one another, breaking down barriers and forming a community rooted in grace. His compassion extended beyond his circle. Zacchaeus, transformed by encountering Jesus, sought reconciliation with those he had wronged. The compassion of Jesus radiated outward, inspiring healing in relationships that once seemed beyond repair. Today, his compassion still heals broken relationships. It softens hardened hearts. It restores trust. It invites humility and forgiveness. Through his compassion, relationships can begin again. Part 64. Compassion that embraced the margins of society. Jesus' ministry was marked by a consistent movement toward people living on the margins, those society ignored, judged, or mistreated. His compassion redefined worth, reminding the world that every person has value in the eyes of God. He welcomed the poor, speaking blessings over them. He touched the leper, restoring dignity to a man others feared to approach. He spoke with the Samaritan woman, crossing cultural and social barriers to bring hope. He healed servants, defended widows, and uplifted the oppressed. Even in his parables, Jesus highlighted those on the margins. The Good Samaritan, the outsider, was the hero of compassion. The widow with 2 coins was honored for her generosity. The prodigal son, the disgraced youth, was celebrated when he returned home. His compassion does not look at labels, status, or reputation. It sees the heart. It elevates the humble. It gives voice to the overlooked. Early Christians lived this out. They cared for orphans, widows, prisoners, and the poor. They welcomed strangers as family. They formed communities where social barriers were replaced by compassion and unity. Today, his compassion still calls us to look beyond society's standards, to see the value in those who are forgotten, to show kindness to those who are ignored, to bring God's love to places where the world rarely looks. Part 65.
Compassion that strengthened the weak in spirit. One of the greatest demonstrations of Jesus' compassion was the way he strengthened those who felt spiritually weak or discouraged. He met people in the fragile places of their faith and offered encouragement that rekindled hope. In the garden before his arrest, Jesus found his disciples overwhelmed with sorrow and fear. Instead of rebuking them harshly, he reminded them to pray, offering guidance instead of judgment. His compassion saw their trembling hearts and spoke gently into their fear. When Peter's courage failed and he denied Jesus, Peter believed his spiritual calling was shattered. Yet Jesus restored him after the resurrection, not by giving him a second chance alone, but by giving him strength and purpose. Feed my sheep. These words did more than forgive, they empowered. Jesus strengthened Martha's faith when she mourned for her brother Lazarus. She believed in his power, yet struggled to understand God's timing. Jesus responded with compassion, saying, "I am the resurrection and the life." His words lifted her spirit and anchored her hope in eternal truth. Early believers relied heavily on this aspect of Jesus' compassion. They lived in uncertain times, but his compassion strengthened their spirits, helping them stand firm in faith. Today, his compassion still strengthens the weak in spirit. It lifts those who feel discouraged. It steadies those who feel shaken. It renews the faith of every believer who comes to him with an honest heart. Part 66. Compassion that recognized the hidden struggles. Many who came to Jesus carried hidden struggles, burdens they could not express aloud, wounds they were afraid to reveal, and fears that lived just beneath the surface. Jesus saw these hidden struggles without anyone needing to explain them. His compassion reached where words could not. When the woman with the issue of blood touched the hem of his garment, she did not speak her struggle. She only reached in hope. Jesus turned and called her daughter, recognizing the pain she had carried alone for 12 years. His compassion healed not only her body, but her hidden sorrow. When he saw the widow placing her 2 small coins into the offering, he understood the quiet sacrifice she made. No one else noticed the struggle behind her gift, but Jesus did. His compassion honored her faith and her unseen devotion. When he looked upon the crowds, Scripture says he saw them as sheep without a shepherd. He understood their confusion, their longing, their pressures. His compassion recognized the burdens they carried silently within their hearts. Early believers found comfort in knowing that Jesus understood not only what they said, but also what they could not put into words. They felt seen, known, and understood. Today, his compassion still recognizes hidden struggles. It meets the silent fears. It comforts the unspoken griefs. It brings peace to the battles no one else sees. His compassion understands the heart more deeply than we understand ourselves.
Part 67. Compassion that comforted in moments of fear. Fear touched many lives in Jesus' time. Fear of illness, fear of the unknown, fear of rejection, and fear of death itself. Jesus met people in those moments of fear with compassion that comforted, calmed, and reassured them. When the disciples were in the boat during the storm, they were overwhelmed by fear. The waves rose, the wind roared, and panic settled into their hearts. Jesus stood and spoke peace into the chaos. Peace, be still. His compassion calmed not only the sea, but the fear within them. We see this again when the synagogue ruler, Jairus, heard the devastating words that his daughter had died. Fear tried to overtake him. But Jesus immediately said, "Do not be afraid, only believe." His compassion met Jairus' fear with hope stronger than despair.
Even on the mountain of transfiguration, when the disciples fell on their faces in terror, Jesus touched them and said, "Do not be afraid." His compassion lifted them from fear into reassurance. Early Christians clung to these moments when they faced persecution and uncertainty. They knew Jesus' compassion was not distant. It met them in their fear and strengthened their hearts. Today, his compassion still comforts in moments of fear. It brings calm to anxious minds. It strengthens trembling hearts. It whispers peace to the soul when life feels overwhelming. His compassion reminds us that fear does not have the final word. Part 68. Compassion that opened eyes to God's presence. Jesus' compassion was not only about healing bodies or comforting hearts, it also opened people's eyes to the presence of God in their lives. His compassion illuminated moments where God was near, even when people did not recognize it. On the road to Emmaus, the two disciples walked with heavy hearts, believing Jesus was gone forever. They did not realize he was walking beside them. But as he spoke, their eyes were opened, not just physically, but spiritually. "Did not our hearts burn within us?" they later said. His compassion opened their eyes to see God at work even in sorrow. We see this again when he fed the multitudes. The people came seeking teaching, but his compassion showed them God's provision. Through a simple meal, their eyes were opened to the generosity of the Father. When he healed the blind, many received more than physical sight. Their spirits awakened to the reality of God's love. They saw his mercy, his kindness, and his nearness in ways they had never understood before. Early believers experienced this compassion as they prayed, worshiped, and served others. Their eyes opened to the presence of God in everyday life, in fellowship, in miracles, in suffering, and in joy. Today, his compassion still opens our eyes. It helps us see God in moments of peace and in moments of struggle. It reveals his guidance when we feel lost. It shows his love in places we might overlook. His compassion awakens the heart to see God more clearly.
Part 69. Compassion that restored trust in God. Many people Jesus encountered struggled with trust. Trust in themselves, trust in others, and trust in God. Life had wounded them. Disappointments had worn them down. Yet Jesus' compassion gently restored their ability to trust again. When he multiplied the loaves and fish, he showed the crowd that God could be trusted with their needs. What seemed impossible became possible through the compassion and power of Christ. Their trust grew as they saw God's faithfulness displayed before their eyes. When he told the disciples to cast their nets on the other side of the boat after a night of failure, they hesitated. Yet his compassion encouraged them to try again. The miraculous catch restored their trust, not only in his guidance, but in God's ability to work beyond human limitations. When he healed the centurion's servant from a distance, he affirmed the centurion's faith, saying he had not seen such trust in all of Israel. His compassion strengthened the hearts of all who witnessed the miracle, reminding them that trust in God is never misplaced. Early Christians learned that trust was built not on circumstances, but on the character of God. Jesus' compassion showed them that God's heart is steady, faithful, and worthy of confidence. Today, his compassion still restores trust. It strengthens those who have been disappointed. It encourages those afraid to hope again. It reminds us that God is reliable, loving, and close to his people. Part 70. Compassion that brought peace in uncertain times. Uncertainty was a constant reality for many in Jesus' day. Political tensions, illness, poverty, oppression, and spiritual confusion created an atmosphere of instability. Jesus met these uncertainties with compassion that brought peace. Peace deeper than circumstances. Peace that settled in the soul. When he said, "My peace I give to you, not as the world gives do I give to you," he offered a kind of peace untouched by fear or anxiety. His compassion reassured hearts that God remained sovereign even when life felt unpredictable. He brought peace to the disciples when they feared persecution. He reminded them that the Father knew them intimately, even the number of hairs on their heads. His compassion turned uncertainty into trust. He brought peace to individuals standing on the edge of confusion, Mary at the empty tomb, the disciples on the stormy sea, Nicodemus seeking answers in the night. His compassion calmed their questions and filled their hearts with assurance. Early believers held on to this peace through trials, imprisonments, and hardship. They remembered that Jesus had promised a peace that would guard their hearts and minds. Today, his compassion still brings peace in uncertainty. It steadies us when the future feels unclear. It comforts us when fear rises. It anchors the heart in God's unwavering presence. His compassion is a reminder that even when the path is unknown, the shepherd who guides us is trustworthy and near.
Part 71. Compassion that drew near in moments of weakness and fatigue. Jesus understood that human beings often reach points of physical, emotional, and spiritual fatigue. Life demands much, and hearts can grow tired. His compassion met people in their exhaustion, offering strength that renewed the soul. When the disciples returned from ministry, weary from traveling and teaching, Jesus said, "Come away by yourselves to a quiet place and rest." His compassion recognized their limits. He did not push them beyond what they could bear. He invited them into rest, reminding them that God values restoration as much as service. When he fed the crowd of 4,000, these people had followed him for 3 days. They were hungry, worn out, and far from home. Jesus said, "I have compassion on the crowd." Before teaching, before sending them away, he cared for their needs. His compassion offered refreshment to tired hearts and bodies. Even in the Garden of Gethsemane, when sorrow overwhelmed him, he sought the Father's presence. His own prayer demonstrated how compassion can bring comfort during weakness, how turning to God renews the strength we lack. Early believers faced grueling circumstances. The compassion of Jesus reminded them that God did not expect endless strength from weary people. He offered rest, renewal, and the assurance that weakness is not failure. It is an invitation to God's sustaining love. Today, his compassion still draws near when we reach our limits. It comforts tired minds. It strengthens weary spirits. It offers rest to hearts carrying too much. His compassion reminds us that God sees our struggles and meets us with gentle care. Part 72. Compassion that saw beyond the moment into eternity. Much of Jesus' compassion focused on the immediate needs of the people around him, healing sickness, feeding the hungry, comforting the grieving. But his compassion also looked beyond the moment, into the eternal destiny of every soul. When he taught about the kingdom of God, his compassion revealed a future filled with hope, justice, and everlasting peace. He spoke of eternal life not as a distant concept, but as a reality shaped by God's love. His compassion guided people toward repentance, not to shame them,
but to lead them into eternal joy. When he said, "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul?" he spoke from a compassion that saw the deep, eternal value of every person. When he promised paradise to the thief on the cross, his compassion reached beyond earthly suffering and into heavenly glory. In the midst of agony, he offered eternal peace. We also see this eternal compassion in his teachings about heaven. He described a place where sorrow is gone, where tears are wiped away, and where the weary find everlasting rest. His compassion revealed that this world's troubles are temporary, but God's love endures forever. Early Christians lived with this eternal perspective. Jesus' compassion strengthened them to endure trials, knowing that their future with God was secure. Today, his compassion still lifts our eyes beyond the present moment. It reminds us that God's promises are true. It assures us that eternity is filled with joy and peace. It gives us hope that carries us through every season of life.
Part 73. Compassion that transformed ordinary moments into sacred encounters. Many of the most meaningful expressions of Jesus' compassion did not take place in dramatic settings. They happened in ordinary moments, simple, everyday interactions that became sacred because of his presence. When he broke bread with his disciples, a simple meal became a moment of deep fellowship and peace. His compassion made the table a place of belonging. When he walked along dusty roads, listening to the concerns of those beside him, those ordinary conversations became life-changing encounters. His compassion turned casual steps into moments of revelation. When he sat by a well in the heat of the day and spoke with the Samaritan woman, a routine stop became a turning point in her life. His compassion transformed loneliness into purpose. When he watched a widow place 2 small coins into the offering, a humble action became a lesson of faith that would echo through history. His compassion honored what others ignored. Even his gentle moments of rest, prayer, and silence taught his followers how to approach God with peace and humility. His compassion sanctified everyday life, showing that God is present not only in miracles, but in the quiet rhythms of daily existence. Early Christians embraced this truth. They found God in shared meals, in simple prayers, in acts of kindness, and in daily fellowship. Through Jesus, ordinary life became holy. Today, his compassion still transforms ordinary moments. A word of encouragement becomes a gift of grace. A quiet prayer becomes a doorway to peace. A simple act of kindness becomes evidence of God's love. His compassion fills everyday life with sacred meaning. Part 74. Compassion that reached across every barrier. Throughout his ministry, Jesus crossed barriers that religious, cultural, and social systems had built. His compassion moved freely across boundaries, reaching those who lived beyond the borders of acceptance. He spoke to Samaritans, despite the hostility between their people and the Jews. He healed Gentiles when others believed God's blessing was only for Israel. He welcomed children when society considered them insignificant. He uplifted women in a culture that often restricted their place. He honored the poor, the sick, the oppressed, and the overlooked. His compassion refused to be confined by tradition, prejudice, or fear. It broke through walls. It challenged assumptions. It showed that God's love is not limited by human division. When the Roman centurion approached Jesus to heal his servant, Jesus praised his faith, an extraordinary moment in a culture where Romans were often seen as enemies. When he healed the Syrophoenician woman's daughter, he demonstrated that God's mercy extends far beyond Israel. When he touched those considered unclean, he revealed that compassion outweighs ritual boundaries. Early Christians followed this example. Diverse groups gathered as one body, Jew and Gentile, rich and poor, slave and free. The compassion of Christ erased dividing lines and formed a new family in God. Today, his compassion still reaches across every barrier. It unites people from different backgrounds. It heals divisions and softens hardened hearts. It reminds us that God's love is wide enough for all, deep enough for all, and available to all.
As we come closer to the end of this reflection, it helps to slow down and remember what compassion truly looked like in the life of Jesus. Not simply compassion as an emotion, but compassion as a steady way of being. Compassion that noticed people, compassion that paused, compassion that stayed present, compassion that gave dignity back to those who felt they had lost it. For many who met Jesus, the greatest miracle was not only the healing of a body, but the healing of the heart. It was the feeling of being seen, fully and gently, without being pushed away. Jesus did not treat people as interruptions. He treated them as souls, and that changes everything. Sometimes compassion is not a dramatic act. Sometimes it is a quiet moment where someone finally realizes they are not forgotten. In the Gospels, we see Jesus stop for the one person calling out. We see him turn toward the one person reaching out. We see him defend the one person being condemned. We see him speak peace to the one person who is trembling. And when we look at those moments, we see something deeper. We see the heart of God. The compassion of Jesus was not random. It was not occasional. It was consistent because it flowed from who he is. His compassion was not based on someone's value in society. It was not based on someone's reputation. It was not based on whether others approved. It was not based on whether the person deserved it. It was simply the overflow of divine love. That is why his compassion felt so different from anything people had known. People were used to being measured, judged, ranked, labeled. They were used to being treated according to what they could offer. But Jesus reversed that. He treated the weak with honor. He treated the ashamed with gentleness. He treated the outsider with welcome. He treated the sinner with mercy and a path forward. He treated the grieving with tears and comfort. He treated the weary with an invitation to rest. And he did it again and again. As you listen, maybe what you need most tonight is not more information, not more striving, not more mental effort. Maybe what you need is to rest in this truth. The compassion of Jesus is still steady, still real, still near. Not because life is always easy, not because pain is not real, not because questions do not exist, but because his compassion is greater than all of it. It is also worth remembering how Jesus expressed compassion in more than one way. Sometimes his compassion was tender and quiet. Sometimes it was firm and protective. Sometimes it was a gentle touch. Sometimes it was a strong word. Compassion is not always the same shape, but it always carries the same heart. When Jesus protected the vulnerable, that was compassion. When Jesus forgave those weighed down by guilt, that was compassion. When Jesus fed hungry crowds, that was compassion. When Jesus listened to questions in the night, that was compassion. When Jesus stood near sorrow and wept, that was compassion. When Jesus corrected his disciples and guided them back, that was compassion. Compassion is not merely sympathy, it is love that moves toward people. And this is what made Jesus so unforgettable. He moved toward the human heart, toward pain, toward need, toward weakness, toward the places people normally avoid. Many people avoid suffering because it is uncomfortable. Many people avoid messy situations because it costs something. Many people avoid those with broken reputations because it risks association. But Jesus, in compassion, moved toward those very places. He did not fear the mess. He did not fear the criticism. He did not fear being misunderstood.
He came to seek and save the lost. And the lost are not only those who are obviously far from God. Sometimes people are lost while they look fine on the outside. Sometimes people are lost while they are busy, productive, and functioning. Sometimes people are lost in their thoughts, lost in their fears, lost in their regrets, lost in their loneliness. Jesus saw all of it. He knew what people carried in silence. He knew what they hid beneath calm faces. He knew what they feared would never change. He knew the places they did not speak about. And his compassion reached them anyway. As this final section continues, let it be a gentle reminder. You do not need to perform for his compassion. You do not need to earn it. You do not need to prove you are worthy. Compassion is not a wage. It is a gift. It is grace.
This is why Jesus could say, "Come to me," because he knew people were tired. Not only physically tired, but tired in the soul. Tired of carrying guilt, tired of carrying worry, tired of carrying shame, tired of carrying fear, tired of trying to be strong without help. And his compassion offered an exchange. Give me the burden, receive my peace. Give me the weight, receive my rest. Some people struggle to receive compassion because they have lived too long without it. Some people feel suspicious of kindness because kindness was not safe in their past. Some people feel they must pay for love or they must keep proving themselves. But Jesus does not love like that. His compassion is pure. It is steady. It does not manipulate. It does not demand payment. It does not vanish when you are weak. His compassion remains. And that remaining compassion is one of the greatest gifts for long nights, anxious seasons, and heavy hearts, because when everything else changes, his compassion stays the same. Your mood may shift, your circumstances may change, your strength may rise and fall, but his compassion remains. The early believers held tightly to this. They lived in uncertain times. They faced persecution, rejection, and hardship, yet they remembered what they had seen in Jesus. They remembered that he did not abandon people. They remembered his patience, his kindness, his mercy, his ability to restore, his promise of peace. They knew compassion was not only something Jesus did, it was something Jesus is. And that is why compassion could become the center of their community. Where the world divided people, they welcomed. Where the world condemned, they restored. Where the world exploited, they served. Where the world ignored, they noticed. Where the world kept score, they forgave. Not because they were naturally better, but because they had been changed by the compassion of Christ. Now, let this part become slower. Let it become softer. Let the heart settle. Think of the many people in Scripture who encountered compassion and were changed. The woman reaching through the crowd, afraid and trembling, hoping for healing, and then being called daughter. The blind man on the roadside, being told to be quiet, and Jesus stopping anyway. The tax collector up in a tree, overlooked and hated, and Jesus calling him by name. The disciple who failed, ashamed and uncertain, and Jesus restoring him with a simple meal and gentle questions. The grieving sisters at a tomb, and Jesus weeping with them before bringing hope. The hungry crowd in the wilderness, and Jesus feeding them abundantly. The sinner condemned by a crowd, and Jesus standing between her and her accusers. These stories are not just history, they reveal what God is like. So if you ever wonder what God feels toward you, look at Jesus. If you ever wonder if God is angry and distant, look at Jesus. If you ever wonder if God has compassion for weakness, look at Jesus. If you ever wonder if God sees the lonely, look at Jesus. If you ever wonder if God can forgive, look at Jesus. Because the compassion of Jesus is the clearest window into the heart of God. And the heart of God is not cold, it is compassionate. Now, as the final minutes pass, it helps to bring this compassion closer, not just as a story, but as an invitation.
Compassion is not only something to admire, it is something to receive and to reflect. To receive compassion means allowing yourself to be seen by God without hiding. It means bringing honest prayers, even simple ones. It means admitting weakness without shame. It means letting go of the idea that you must always be strong to be loved. Some of the most powerful prayers are short. Lord, help me. Lord, give me peace. Lord, I'm tired. Lord, I'm afraid. Lord, I need you. Jesus never rejected those prayers. He welcomed them. To reflect compassion means carrying that same spirit into your life. It means treating people as souls, not as interruptions. It means offering patience even when others are difficult. It means forgiving even when pride wants to hold on to the offense. It means noticing those who feel invisible. It means giving dignity to those who feel small. Compassion does not always fix everything instantly, but it changes the environment around the heart. Compassion makes space for healing. Compassion creates safety. Compassion invites truth. Compassion opens the door to restoration. And if you think, I'm not naturally compassionate, remember, compassion is something God grows in us. You do not have to create it alone. You receive it first, then it overflows. The more you sit in the compassion of Jesus, the more it shapes you. Now, as we move closer to the end, let this become a quiet resting place. If you are listening while lying down, allow your shoulders to drop. Allow your breath to slow. Allow the day to release its grip. Allow your thoughts to settle. You do not need to solve everything tonight. You do not need to carry tomorrow tonight. You do not need to replay every mistake. You do not need to hold the weight alone. The compassion of Jesus is enough for this moment. He is not asking you to be perfect. He is asking you to come close. He is asking you to rest. Rest in His mercy. Rest in His patience. Rest in His forgiveness. Rest in His love. And remember, compassion is not only for those who have everything together. Compassion is for those who are tired, those who are burdened, those who are discouraged, those who are unsure, those who are still learning. Jesus did not come for the perfect. He came for the needy, and all humans are needy in one way or another. His compassion makes no one too far, no past too heavy, no shame too deep, no fear too strong, no failure too final, no grief too complicated, no loneliness too hidden. His compassion reaches. Now let this final blessing be slow and gentle, like a quiet closing prayer. May the compassion of Jesus cover you tonight. May it calm your thoughts. May it soften your fears. May it lighten the burdens you carried through the day. May His mercy remind you that you are not defined by your worst moment. May His patience remind you that growth takes time. May His forgiveness remind you that grace is real. May His presence remind you that you are not alone. May the peace of God, deeper than understanding, guard your heart and mind. May your spirit find rest. May your body relax. May your soul be quiet. And as you fall asleep, may you rest in this truth. Jesus is compassionate. God is near. You are held. Let the day go now. Let tomorrow wait, and rest in the compassion of Jesus. Amen.